So buckle up because this is the story of how I went from being the most overlooked employee at my company to becoming the VP of operations in less than 24 hours. And yes, it involved freezing $7 million in payroll and watching my entire company panic. But let me start from the beginning because this revenge was 5 years in the making. I'm Jessica, I'm 28, and up until recently I was just another face in the crowd at TechFlow Solutions, a mid-sized software company in Austin. For 5 whole years, I'd been grinding away in operations. I'm talking 12-hour days, weekend calls, process optimizations that nobody asked for but everybody benefited from. I lived in breath deficiency. My apartment looked like a shrine to productivity books, and my coffee table was covered in workflow diagrams that I'd sketch out during Netflix binges. Here's the thing about me, I'm a firm believer in meritocracy. Like, seriously. I think if you work hard, if you prove yourself, if you deliver results that actually matter, then you should get rewarded. Period. That's probably naive in hindsight, but that belief kept me going through all the little slights and disappointments that started adding up over the years. And trust me, there were plenty of those. You know how it is, you're in a meeting, you suggest something brilliant, and suddenly 3 guys are talking over you like you're invisible. Then 20 minutes later, one of them repeats your exact idea and everyone's like, wow, Brad, that's genius. Meanwhile, you're sitting there thinking, did I just hallucinate saying that exact same thing? Or there were the performance reviews where I'd get feedback like Jessica needs to work on her assertiveness, and then literally the next bullet point would be Jessica can come across as too aggressive in meetings. Like, make up your minds, people. Either I'm too quiet or I'm too loud, I can't be both. But I stayed because honestly, I loved the work. I loved solving problems, streamlining processes, making things run smoother, and I was damn good at it. Over my 5 years there, I'd basically revolutionized how our operations ran. I implemented new project management systems, optimized our vendor relationships, and this is important for later, completely automated our payroll processing system. The payroll thing was actually my baby. When I started, payroll was this nightmare of spreadsheets and manual calculations that took 3 people 2 full days every month to complete. And mistakes? Oh my God, the mistakes. People getting paid twice, others not getting paid at all, tax withholdings calculated wrong, it was a mess. So I spent about 6 months of my own time, evenings and weekends, building this beautiful automated system that integrated with our HR database and could process everyone's pay in about 2 hours with 0 errors. Management loved it so much they gave me a $500 bonus and a pizza party. Yeah, a pizza party. For saving the company probably $50,000 a year in processing costs and error corrections. But whatever, I wasn't doing it for recognition, I was doing it because inefficiency makes my eye twitch. Fast forward to last year and the VP of Operations position opens up. Now this is where things get interesting. Our old VP, Robert, was this sweet guy in his 60s who'd been with the company since the Stone Age. He knew I was essentially doing half his job already, so when he announced his retirement, he pulled me aside and said, Jessica, that position has your name on it, you've earned it. And honestly, I believed him. I mean, I was already handling most of the VP responsibilities. When clients had operational issues, they called me directly. When other departments needed process improvements, they came to me. I'd successfully led a cross-departmental project that streamlined our client onboarding process and reduced our setup time by 60%. That project alone saved the company about $300,000 a year. My direct manager was totally supportive. She'd been pushing for my promotion for months, writing glowing reviews and advocating for me in leadership meetings. Even people from other departments would joke about how I was basically the unofficial VP already. It felt like a sure thing. So when they announced they were opening the position for applications, I wasn't worried. I mean, who else could they possibly consider? I knew that job inside and out. I had the relationships, the track record, the institutional knowledge. Plus, I'd been essentially doing the work without the title or the pay for almost a year. I put together what I thought was a killer application. Detailed project summaries, metrics showing my impact, testimonials from colleagues, a whole strategic vision for the operations department. I was proud of that application. It was like a love letter to everything I'd accomplished at the company. Interview process was interesting, and by interesting, I mean completely demoralizing. The first red flag was when they brought in external candidates. Like, okay, I get it, due diligence and all that, but some of these people had never worked in tech, let alone in operations. One guy's most recent job was managing a restaurant chain. Another woman had been doing HR for a construction company. Don't get me wrong, those are totally valid careers, but operations at a tech company. It's a pretty specific skill set. But the real kicker came during my final interview with the executive team. The CEO, the CFO, the head of HR, they're all there and they're asking me these basic questions like, how would you handle vendor negotiations? And what's your approach to process improvement? I'm thinking, seriously, you've watched me do this exact work for 5 years. You want to know my approach? Look at the results I've delivered. And then, and this still makes my blood boil, the CFO, this pompous guy named Richard who'd only been with the company for 2 years, asks me, "Do you think you have the leadership presence for a VP role?" Leadership presence? I just stared at him for a second because what does that even mean? I'd been leading cross-functional teams for years. I'd mentored junior employees, managed vendor relationships, presented to the board multiple times, but apparently I didn't have leadership presence. I should have known right then. I should have seen the writing on the wall. But I was so invested in the idea of finally getting recognition for my work that I convinced myself they were just being thorough. The waiting period was torture. 2 weeks of checking my email every 5 minutes, analyzing every interaction with my managers for clues, driving myself absolutely crazy, kept reassuring me, saying things like it's just a formality and they'd be insane not to give it to you. Other colleagues were congratulating me prematurely, assuming it was a done deal. And then came the email. I'll never forget it. I was at my desk, probably optimizing some workflow or debugging a process issue, basically doing VP-level work without the VP title as usual when that email landed in my inbox. Ray, VP of Operations, position decision. My heart was pounding as I opened it, and the first line, God, I can still recite it from memory. We are pleased to announce that after a thorough review process, we have selected Michael for the position of VP of Operations. Michael, I had to read the name 3 times because I had no idea who that was. Turns out Michael was Richard, the CFO's nephew. 24 years old, fresh out of college with a business degree, and his most relevant work experience was a summer internship at his uncle's previous company. His qualifications for running operations at a tech company? Absolutely zero. But the email got better. Oh, it got so much better. The reasoning they gave was that they wanted to bring fresh perspectives and innovative thinking to the operations role. Fresh perspectives? From someone who'd never worked a day in operations. Innovative thinking? From someone whose biggest professional accomplishment was probably a group project in his senior seminar. I just sat there staring at my screen, feeling like I'd been punched in the gut. 5 years. 5 years of proving myself, of going above and beyond, of basically doing the job already, and they gave it to a kid with no experience because he happened to share DNA with the CFO. The worst part, the absolute worst part, was how everyone reacted, looked when I went to her office. She kept apologizing and saying she was shocked by the decision and that she fought hard for me in the meetings. Other colleagues were awkward and sympathetic, giving me those pitying looks like I was some kind of charity case. But the people who mattered, the executives, acted like it was the most natural thing in the world. Richard introduced his nephew around the office like he was some kind of wunderkind. Michael brings such great energy and fresh ideas. Yeah, I bet he does. Nothing says innovation like hearing your relative. And Michael, oh, Michael was something else. This kid strutted around the office like he owned the place, asking questions that revealed just how little he understood about what we actually did. In his first week, he scheduled a meeting with me to get up to speed on operations. I'll never forget that meeting. He sits down across from me with this yellow legal pad and a pen, looking all serious and professional, and goes, "So Jessica, can you walk me through what operations does here?" What operations does? At the company where I'd been doing operations for 5 years, where I'd automated systems, managed vendor relationships, optimized processes, and basically kept the entire back end running smoothly, he wanted me to explain to him what his own job was supposed to be. But here's where it gets really good. Because while I'm sitting there explaining basic operational concepts to my new boss who's 5 years younger than me and has no relevant experience, something clicked in my brain. A memory, actually. A memory of something I'd built into the payroll system years ago that I'd almost forgotten about. See, when I was building that automated payroll system, there was this period where we were migrating from our old HR database to a new one. It was a vulnerable time, lots of data moving around, integration issues, potential for things to go wrong. So I built in this hidden authentication protocol. It was like an emergency brake designed to prevent payroll from processing if there were any data integrity issues or security concerns. The way it worked was simple but elegant. Deep in the code, there was a 2-factor authentication check that would trigger under certain conditions. If activated, it would require 2 things to unlock: my unique digital signature, which was tied to my employee ID and system access, and a randomly generated code that would be sent to my personal email, not my company email, but my personal account. I'd set it up during those late nights when I was paranoid about the data migration going wrong. The last thing I wanted was for payroll to process with corrupted data and have 500 employees get paid incorrectly. So I built in this that would essentially freeze the system if anything looked suspicious. The thing is, once we successfully completed the migration and everything was running smoothly, I never removed it. It was just sitting there in the code, dormant like a sleeping dragon. And in all the years since, through system updates and maintenance and new employees coming and going, nobody had ever noticed it. It was my little secret, buried in thousands of lines of code that only I really understood. So there I am, sitting across from Michael as he asks me to explain what operations is, and suddenly I remember this hidden protocol. And a thought starts forming in my mind. A dangerous, beautiful, absolutely perfect thought. They wanted fresh perspectives. They wanted to overlook 5 years of proven performance for nepotism. Fine. But they were about to learn exactly how valuable my institutional knowledge really was. I finished the meeting with Michael, giving him a basic overview of our systems and processes, carefully avoiding any mention of the deeper technical details. He took notes on his little legal pad like a diligent student, completely oblivious to the fact that he was swimming in waters way deeper than he could handle. Over the next few days, I watched him struggle with the basics. He'd ask questions in meetings that revealed he didn't understand fundamental concepts about our business. He'd make suggestions that showed he had no grasp of our client relationships or operational constraints. It was painful to watch, honestly, like watching someone try to perform surgery when they'd never even taken a first aid class. But the breaking point came during an all-hands meeting where Richard proudly announced some exciting changes to the operations department. Apparently, Michael had been busy in his first week, and he had some innovative ideas for improving efficiency. His big innovation, outsourcing our entire vendor management process to a third-party company, the same vendor management that I'd spent 2 years optimizing, building relationships, negotiating better contracts. He wanted to throw all of that away and pay some external company to do it worse for more money, all because it would free up internal resources for more strategic work. I raised my hand. Michael, can you walk us through the cost-benefit analysis for this change? Because our current vendor relationships save us about $200,000 a year compared to market rates. He fumbled through some generic response about economies of scale and leveraging external expertise. It was clear he had no idea what our current costs were or what we'd be paying for outsourcing. He was just throwing around business school buzzwords and hoping they'd stick. That's when I knew it was time. I went home that night and spent hours going through the payroll system code, refreshing my memory on exactly how the authentication protocol worked. It was even more elegant than I remembered. The trigger was something I could activate remotely, and once it was set, the system would lock down completely until both authentication factors were provided. The beautiful part was that it would look like a system error. No obvious signs of tampering, no clear indication of what had gone wrong. Just a frozen payroll system with a cryptic error message that wouldn't mean anything to anyone except me. I decided to wait until Monday, Michael's second week on the job, right after he'd had the weekend to settle into his new role and probably tell all his friends about his fancy new title. The timing had to be perfect. Monday morning came and I went to work like normal, said good morning to everyone, grabbed my coffee, settled in at my desk. Payroll was scheduled to process that afternoon. We always ran it on the first Monday of the month, like clockwork. 500 employees expecting their direct deposits to hit their accounts by Tuesday morning. At exactly 11:47 a.m., I logged into the system from my personal laptop, using a VPN to mask my connection. With a few keystrokes, I activated the authentication protocol. The system accepted the command and sent me a confirmation: emergency authentication enabled, payroll processing suspended pending verification. Then I closed my laptop and went to lunch. I grabbed a sandwich from the deli down the street and sat in the little park across from our office building, eating slowly and watching the windows of our floor. I could imagine what was happening inside, Michael probably in his office, oblivious to the ticking time bomb I just activated. Richard in meetings, talking about quarterly projections. Everyone going about their normal Monday, completely unaware that payroll was about to become everyone's biggest nightmare. At 3 p.m., the system was scheduled to start processing payroll. I was back at my desk by then, working on some mundane reports and pretending everything was normal. At 3:15, I got the first hint that things were going according to plan. Jessica, it was, calling from her office. Are you seeing any issues with the payroll system? I'm getting some weird error messages. I walked over to her office, doing my best to look concerned. What kind of error messages? She showed me her screen. There it was, beautiful in its simplicity. Payroll processing suspended authentication required contact system administrator. Huh, I said, frowning at the screen like I was seeing it for the first time. That's strange, let me check with it. Of course, it had no idea what was happening. The error message wasn't in any of their documentation because I'd written it myself. As far as they could tell, the system was functioning normally. All the integrations were working, the database connections were solid, there were no server issues. But for some reason, payroll just wouldn't process. By 4 p.m., word had spread throughout the office. Employees were starting to ask questions. HR was fielding calls from people wondering about their paychecks. Michael was packing around the IT department, demanding answers that nobody could give him. And Richard was in full panic mode. He kept calling Michael into his office for hushed conversations, probably trying to figure out how his golden boy was going to handle his first real crisis. The beauty of it was that nobody suspected me. Why would they? I was just another employee, recently passed over for promotion, probably bitter but ultimately harmless. The idea that I might have the technical knowledge and system access to single-handedly freeze the entire payroll process, it didn't even occur to them. By 5 p.m., they'd brought in external IT consultants. By 6 p.m., they were talking about calling the software vendor, even though our payroll system was entirely custom-built. The panic was spreading through the company like wildfire. I stayed late, of course, had to look concerned and helpful. I even volunteered to work through the night if needed, really selling the whole dedicated employee trying to solve the crisis act. Tuesday morning was when things really started to get interesting. 500 employees waking up to find their direct deposits hadn't processed, phones ringing off the hook in HR, people with mortgages and car payments and bills to pay, all wondering where their money was. The executive team was in full crisis mode. Emergency meetings, conference calls with lawyers about potential liability, discussions about getting emergency funding to cut manual checks for everyone. It was chaos, beautiful chaos. And through it all, Michael was floundering. This was supposed to be his big moment, his chance to prove himself as the new VP of operations. Instead, he was presiding over the biggest operational failure in the company's history, with no idea how to fix it or even what was causing it. I have to give him credit, though, he was trying. He'd basically moved into the office, sleeping on the couch in the break room, working around the clock with it to figure out what was wrong. The kid was in way over his head, but he wasn't giving up. Wednesday morning, I decided it was time for phase 2. I came in early and sent an email. Not to Michael, not to anyone in the operational chain of command. I sent it directly to the CEO, David, with copies to the entire board of directors. The subject line was simple: Ray, payroll processing issue resolution available. The email itself was a masterpiece of professional understatement. Dear David and board members, I hope this email finds you well during what I understand has been a challenging few days regarding our payroll processing system. I wanted to reach out because I believe I may have information that could help resolve the current situation. As the primary architect of our automated payroll system, I'm familiar with certain security protocols that were implemented during the original development process. Specifically, there is an emergency authentication protocol built into the system that can be triggered during data migrations or potential security threats. This protocol requires two-factor authentication to release, a unique digital signature tied to the system architect's credentials, and a verification code sent to a designated secure email address. If this protocol has been activated, which would explain the current processing suspension, I would be happy to work with the appropriate parties to restore normal payroll operations. I'm available at your convenience to discuss this matter further. Best regards, Jessica. I sent that email at 7:23 a.m. and then sat back to wait. I didn't have to wait long. At 7:41 a.m., my phone rang, David himself. Jessica, thank God, I just got your email. Can you fix this? I kept my voice calm and professional. I believe so, David, but I'll need to understand exactly what triggered the authentication protocol in the first place. These safeguards don't activate randomly. Something must have flagged a potential security concern. Can you come in right now? We need to get this resolved immediately. Of course, I'll be right there. When I walked into the office that morning, it was like entering a war zone. People were running around, phones were ringing constantly, and there was this air of barely controlled panic. The entire executive team was camped out in the main conference room, surrounded by laptops and coffee cups and the unmistakable aura of people who hadn't slept in 2 days. I knocked on the conference room door and David practically sprinted over to let me in. Jessica, please tell me you can fix this. The scene inside was something else. Richard looked like he'd aged 5 years in 3 days. Michael was slumped in a chair, staring at his laptop with the hollow eyes of someone who just watched his career implode in real time. The head of HR was fielding angry calls from employees. The head of legal was on the phone with what sounded like employment lawyers. I think I can help, I said, setting my laptop down on the conference table. But first, I need to understand what might have triggered the authentication protocol. These security measures were designed to activate if the system detected potential threats to payroll integrity. I pulled up the system logs on my laptop, scrolling through screens of technical data that probably looked like hieroglyphics to everyone else in the room. Of course, I knew exactly what had triggered the protocol. I'd triggered it myself, but I needed to sell the story. Interesting, I said, frowning at the screen. It looks like the system flagged some unusual administrative access patterns over the past few weeks. New user credentials, changes to approval workflows, modifications to reporting structures. I glanced up at Michael. Have there been any recent changes to system administration or user permissions? Michael looked confused. I mean, I got access to everything when I started, but… That might be it, I said, nodding thoughtfully. The system is probably interpreting the rapid elevation of new administrative credentials as a potential security threat. It's actually working exactly as designed, better safe than sorry when it comes to payroll data. Richard finally spoke up. Can you override it? I can, but I'll need a few minutes to generate the authentication codes and verify the system integrity. The good news is that once we clear this, I can adjust the security parameters to prevent false positives in the future. For the next 20 minutes, I put on quite a show. Typing commands, cross-referencing security logs, running diagnostic protocols that were really just me running harmless system queries to make it look like I was working hard to solve the problem. Finally, I turned to the room. Okay, I think I've identified the issue and generated the override codes, but before I release the authentication lock, I want to make sure we're all on the same page about what happened here. David leaned forward. What do you mean? Well, this whole situation could have been avoided if there had been better communication about system architecture and security protocols. These safeguards exist for a reason, and anyone taking over operational responsibilities should have been briefed on them. The silence in the room was deafening. Everyone was looking at Michael, who was staring at his hands like he wanted to disappear. In the future, I continued, I'd recommend ensuring that any operational leadership changes include comprehensive knowledge transfer sessions with the existing technical team. That way, we can avoid triggering security protocols accidentally. Absolutely, David said quickly. Whatever you think is best, can you fix it now? I turned back to my laptop and started typing. With a few keystrokes, I sent the release command to the authentication protocol. On screens around the room, people started seeing status changes as the system came back online. Payroll processing should resume immediately, I said. Everyone should have their direct deposits by end of business today. The relief in the room was palpable. David actually slumped back in his chair like he'd been holding his breath for 3 days. Richard pulled out his phone to start making calls. Michael just looked stunned. Jessica, David said, I can't thank you enough. You've saved us from a complete disaster. Just doing my job, I said modestly, though I do think this highlights some important gaps in our operational knowledge transfer processes. And that's when David said the words I'd been waiting to hear. We need to talk about your role here. The conversation that followed was everything I'd dreamed of and more. David pulled me aside after the crisis meeting and basically offered me everything I'd wanted for years. Not just the VP of Operations position. Michael was being reassigned to a role that better suits his experience level, but also a significant salary increase, a spot on the executive team, and a public acknowledgement of my critical role in resolving the crisis. I'm embarrassed that it took a situation like this for us to recognize your value, David said. You've clearly been operating at a VP level for years, and we should have promoted you long ago. I accepted graciously, of course. No gloating, no I told you so's, just professional appreciation for the opportunity to finally get the recognition I deserved. The aftermath was, well, it was everything I could have hoped for. Michael was quietly moved to a junior analyst position in accounting, where he'd hopefully learn something about the business before being trusted with any real responsibility. Richard tried to save face by claiming that the whole thing had been a learning experience and that they'd always planned to evaluate the organizational structure after the initial transition period. Nobody bought it. But the best part was how my colleagues reacted. Suddenly, I wasn't just Jessica from operations. I was Jessica the crisis hero, Jessica the system expert, Jessica the person who'd single-handedly saved everyone's paychecks. The respect I'd been craving for years finally materialized overnight. Was thrilled, of course. She'd been advocating for my promotion for so long that she felt vindicated. I knew you deserved that position, she kept saying. I'm just glad everyone else finally sees it too. The company culture shifted pretty dramatically after that. David implemented new policies around knowledge transfer and succession planning. They brought in consultants to review operational processes and ensure that critical system knowledge wasn't siloed with individual employees. Ironically, all of these changes just reinforced how valuable my expertise really was. And the payroll system? Well, I did eventually remove the authentication protocol with proper documentation and executive approval, of course. I framed it as a security audit and optimization project, cleaning up legacy code and ensuring that all system safeguards were properly documented and understood by the broader IT team. A year later, I'm thriving as VP of Operations. The department is running better than ever. We've implemented new efficiency measures that have saved the company hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I've built a team of professionals who actually understand what they're doing. As for Michael, I actually feel a little bad for the kid. He wasn't inherently malicious, just inexperienced and probably pushed into a situation he wasn't ready for by his uncle's ambitions. Last I heard, he'd found his footing in the accounting department and was actually doing decent work at a level appropriate to his experience. Richard, on the other hand, well, let's just say his credibility never fully recovered. He's still the CFO, but his influence has definitely waned. People remember that he tried to install his unqualified nephew in a critical position and nearly caused a company-wide crisis as a result. The moral of the story: sometimes the best revenge isn't dramatic confrontation or public humiliation. Sometimes it's just letting people experience the natural consequences of their bad decisions. They wanted to overlook experience and expertise in favor of nepotism? Fine. But when that decision inevitably blew up in their faces, I was right there ready to clean up the mess for the right price. I never told anyone the truth about what really happened. As far as the company knows, I'm the hero who solved a mysterious system crisis through technical expertise and dedication. And you know what? That's not entirely untrue. I did solve the crisis, I did have the technical expertise, and I was dedicated to getting the recognition I deserved. The best part is that everything I did was completely legal and, in a weird way, actually beneficial for the company. The crisis forced them to confront serious issues with their promotion practices and knowledge management. It highlighted the importance of technical expertise and institutional knowledge. It resulted in better policies and procedures that will serve the company well in the future. And me, I got everything I wanted. The position, the salary, the respect, the acknowledgement of my value. All it took was a little creative problem solving and the patience to let incompetence reveal itself naturally. So to anyone out there feeling undervalued at work, overlooked for promotions, or frustrated by nepotism and corporate politics, sometimes the best strategy is to know your worth, document your value, and be ready to prove just how indispensable you really are when the opportunity arises. Just make sure you have the technical skills to back it up. Trust me, it's worth the wait.